The following program contains adult themes. Some scenes may be too intense for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Over 16 years, a nurse's aide turned hospital after hospital into his secret slaughterhouse in a terrifying orgy of murder. What made him into a serial killer?
He had no conscience, he had no moral values, and he was void of a lot of basic human feelings.
He killed both male and female. There were more men that he killed than women. He killed both black and white. And some of them were just opportunity.
Mr. Harvey is beyond evil. I mean, he's just so far out of the range that the word evil becomes meaningless.
Serial killer Donald Harvey was arrested on April 4th, 1987, and eventually was convicted of murdering 54 people. In a harrowing and revealing videotape, televised here for the first time, Harvey talks about his childhood, his homosexuality, and his appalling crimes. Tonight we'll witness his terrible confessions, recorded at the time of his arrest, as we probe the psyche of a mass murderer. I'm Teresa Saldana, and this is Confessions of Crime. Tonight, we will explore the mind of that most vicious of criminals, the serial killer. It's a horror increasingly hitting the headlines, as more and more of these modern monsters stalk the streets. Donald Harvey was a serial killer who worked as a nurse's aide, secretly murdering patient after patient. When we go to the hospital, we're vulnerable and trusting. We give doctors and nurses absolute power over our very lives. But Donald Harvey abused that trust. He killed the very people he pretended to protect and cure. And his victims could have been any of us. What made Donald Harvey the cold-blooded killer he became? Perhaps, if we can understand the roots of his life, we can begin to recognize the kind of behavior which predisposes a few twisted individuals to kill. For serial killers are hard to recognize. They're often warm, friendly, and charismatic. They're usually white males, often in their 20s and 30s. Perfectly normal-looking, hard-working, average members of the community. And Donald Harvey fit that pattern. On the surface, his life was structured and normal. Donald Harvey worked in Ohio and Kentucky for 16 years in a variety of healthcare jobs. He was a morgue assistant, a hospital orderly, and a nurse's aide. In what should have been a sign, at one hospital his co-workers labeled him the Angel of Death due to the unusually high numbers of patients who died on his shift. Harvey seemed to have a macabre fascination with death and dying. He loved the absolute power he had over life and death. In the dark of the night, he used to prowl the deserted hallways of the hospital, wondering who would be his next random victim. Harvey would mull over how to kill them: poison, asphyxiation, or medical torture. Harvey truly enjoyed killing, but his first murder was a complete accident. When he was 18, he was ordered to give oxygen to a patient. The gauge on the tank said it was 3/4 full, but in reality, it was empty. The gauge was broken. The patient died. Soon, Harvey was killing other patients by withholding oxygen, all the time hiding his crimes by showing the hospital staff the faulty gauge, which always indicated oxygen in the tanks.
The first patient that I went to hook up, apparently the man was short of breath, and another nurse told me to get a tank of oxygen. So I go and get it. Well, what I didn't tell her at that time was it was already hooked up. It was on 3/4 full, somewhere's in there, between 3/4 and full. I take it in there and it don't work. So I go back and get another one. And that's how I found out to use that gauge was wrong. I could put it up on an empty one that said 3/4. I could put it up on a full one that said 3/4. And that's how I got the idea of using this.
He's in the position now where he is outsmarting doctors. Donald had something over these highly trained and educated and highly thought of men, and Donald found a great deal of satisfaction in being able to outsmart these people.
Harvey became obsessed with his power of life and death, increasingly experimenting with new ways of murdering people. He tried using different poisons and even tortured a patient by inserting a medical catheter into his body so that he could rupture his internal organs.
How many different ways did you use to take a life?
It was just with the pillow, where they hemorrhage with the catheters, the straight catheters, and just with the shut off of the oxygen.
Why would you use the plastic bag?
You take and wet the garbage bag, lay it over the person's face, and take like your finger and run it up in each nostrils, and if they're unconscious, you can insert it over the mouth and press it inside. So each time they breathe in and out, you suck it in, and then just lay a towel or the pillow. You don't want nothing to leave any marks, so you just gently hold it over the person's face. So it looks like a natural death. If you press down, you're going to press on the nose, and there's going to be pressure marks on the patient's face.
And that was show in what way?
In death, that they've been pressure applied.
How did you learn that?
Through reading Agatha Christie.
Harvey's demeanor was so bland, his manner so gentle, that no one suspected him. A typical portrait of a serial killer. And he felt so powerful that he didn't seem to worry about getting caught. Harvey even expanded his circle of victims to include personal friends and family. His way of asserting himself was to murder. If he was angry with you, he would kill you. Sometimes he just killed for fun.
He and his lover got into a fight during a dinner party at their house. The lover took him upstairs and slapped Donald and called him a worthless little Kentucky bitch and that he'd never amount to anything. And Donald apologized, said he was wrong and that he would never do it again. And he didn't, but he began poisoning Carl at that point in time. And that was Donald's way of getting even. He killed his lover's father and poisoned his lover's mother, killed a neighbor. During their investigation, Donald related an incident where they had a party, a dinner party, and Donald fixed beef stroganoff, and then for some reason it was put over for an evening, and they had it the next night, and Donald sprinkled arsenic on the beef stroganoff, and everybody got sick. Donald clearly relates that he was just playing. He didn't intend to kill anybody, and I think that was part of Donald's educating himself on dosages, just to see what worked and what didn't work. I mean, there was one instance where a fellow came into the hospital that knew Donald, and Donald said to him, "Can I get you anything that you need?" And he said, "I'd like to have a fountain Coke. This stuff in the can just doesn't do it." And Donald went down to the concession stand and got him a fountain Coke and put arsenic in it and brought it back and gave it to him. And the guy died.
Harvey's sadistic behavior was remorseless and bizarre, but it's likely that his need to kill was literally that, a hunger that had to be satisfied with death.
Donald Harvey did have an inner need to kill people, and unless he did, he experienced a certain sense of distress.
This rage builds up in Donald, and it's a relief in him, much the same as somebody else would have a sexual release from a climax. And Donald would have this build up in him and then release it by taking somebody's life.
He certainly derives pleasure. He did that purely for satisfaction. Donald and others like him that I have examined speak of the fact that power, the certain sense of rush and elation is associated with the killing. These are what has been called in old literature throughout years, in Germany particularly, these are so-called lust murders.
Donald Harvey's warped mind led to an endless killing spree over a 16-year period. But what kind of adolescence did he have? When we come back, we will explore Harvey's history of childhood abuse, suicide attempts, and overwhelming loneliness. We will also learn the bizarre circumstances of his final capture. Donald Harvey's childhood was harsh. He claims he was abused by both his uncle and a next-door neighbor. In his revealing confession videotape, Harvey says that may have been the starting point for his warped personality.
When I was a little boy, I was molested by my uncle, and I was molested by the neighbor man, which went on for many years. And this would be once or twice a week, because he threatened if I did not let him do to me, he would do it to my mother and hurt my mother. He would abuse me and starve me, because I was at the Mercy Hospital in Hamilton for almost 2 weeks. They'd almost literally starved me to death.
I think anytime you have a child that's extremely abused, that you have the potential for a lot of problems later on, and that treatment has to be given early and continuous.
He was not the typical boy down in Kentucky. He didn't like to wear jeans. He wore dress slacks to school. He insisted on him being pressed and looking nice. He didn't play the rough and tumble games that the boys did. And the stories that I hear from people down there are stories of Donald being beaten up by the boys because he wouldn't play with them, that he preferred to play with the girls, and being pushed off by the girls because they didn't want any of the boys playing with him. And Donald found that the only place that he was accepted was to go with the adults. The ladies thought he was a cute little boy and enjoyed his company, and Donald felt comfortable in that setting.
He was around older people a lot, so that could have had effect. And then there were no other boys around there to play with. He played mostly with the girls because the boys harassed him and called him a sissy, and he wouldn't, kind of stand up a lot of times for himself, and he didn't want to get in no kind of trouble.
He's very meek. He's very shy. He's effeminate. He is very, I know it doesn't sound compatible, but he's very non-aggressive. If you confront him with something, Donald backs down and moves away from the situation. Will apologize. He will not stand up and assert himself at all.
Donald Harvey's feeling of isolation deepened when he discovered that he was homosexual.
I was trying to find my own way, and you go to work in the factories of redneck people. Well, I guess that's the wrong word to use, but you were queer, you had a side of swish, and you were a faggot and all this kind of stuff. And then I finally found 2 guys I thought was going to be my friends. As friends, I didn't know the situation was going to turn into where you were obligated to get in sex. And one thing kept leading into another. I run into like a little nest of homosexuals which were willing to prey upon me. Granted, I was a willing participant.
Because he was gay, there were people that did not want anything to do with him. That he wasn't normal was a phrase that he heard. And as a result of that, Donald had to prove that he was as good as anybody else.
Harvey could not come to terms with his own homosexuality. He felt he didn't belong, and his depression led to a suicide attempt. Harvey tried to take his own life by setting his apartment building on fire.
You stated that the fire was started in an empty apartment?
Right.
And that was an attempt at suicide?
Right. And I went into the bathroom there and shut the door. And there was some carpet on the floor, and I put lighter fluid on it and set the lighter fluid on fire because I thought the smoke inhalation, I would just die. But I shut all the doors, so the fire went out, but it still made enough smoke to alarm someone.
Trying to escape from his private demons, Harvey joined the Air Force. But there, he attempted suicide twice and was placed in a VA hospital. Were the pressures that led to his attempts to take his own life the same pressures that led him to murder?
I don't think that this type of behavior is biologically determined, that it has to do with genes or that it has to do with some chemical imbalance or anything of that sort. I think it is the result not of nature, if you will, but nurture. That is, here is someone where the upbringing contributed to this type of outcome.
For 17 years, Donald Harvey grew up confused and alienated. For 16 more years, he committed a terrible series of cruel, senseless murders, all the time hiding behind a mask of friendly normalcy. How was this prolific killer caught? Stay with us. Harvey's bizarre killing spree is almost unbelievable to most of us, and the reasons behind the slaughter are hard to understand. At first, Harvey claimed the answer was simple. The murders, he said, were actually mercy killings.
He said, I felt sorry for him. These are mercy killings. And then I would pursue that question with him, and when given down to the points of the mercy on it, then he would withdraw. Well, maybe it wasn't, here, maybe this wasn't mercy. And then a few sentences later, he would go back to saying mercy. He would admit it to himself for a while, but not for long.
The 21 that I killed at Drake were mercy killings. The other 4 weren't mercy killings. I know mercy killings not accepted here in the United States. It's against the law. But what I did at Drake, I still feel it was for the good of the patient. And so when I meet my maker, that's something I have to take up with him.
I would have to consider it like 2 personalities. When Donald Harvey was being interviewed and examined by us, he is on the stand, the pressure's there. He makes himself likable, he's cooperative, he's got a sense of humor, he's got characteristics that you like in a person, but you just don't want to like him. When the camera's not on, when the pressure's not on, and he's in his own little world, as I saw him in a jail there in London when we were not around, he's very irritating, very arrogant, obnoxious.
What you have, at least in my opinion, at that point in time, is a person that's never been accepted, who's been abused and had no say-so in that, had no control over the situation, is uneducated, and finds himself in a job now where he has no real authority at all. I mean, Donald's literally cleaning up the crap that nobody else wants to do. And all of a sudden, he's given this power of life and death that few people have. He would bring them close to death and allow them to come back again. And then take them down again and he told one of my staff that this person couldn't talk and communicate, but he was capable of seeing, and Donald said you could see the fear in his eyes every time I walked in and he saw me. And I think that's what Donald enjoyed.
Donald Harvey's murder spree ended the way it had begun, by accident. A random autopsy of a patient who had died on Harvey's ward revealed a distinct smell of almonds, which the coroner recognized as characteristic of cyanide. The investigation led to Donald Harvey, who confessed to that murder. He was charged, and the case was closed until several anonymous phone calls to a local television station led police to investigate every hospital where Harvey had worked. Soon, they discovered a grim pattern of deaths, which all led back to Harvey. He was interrogated, and in exchange for avoiding the death penalty, Harvey confessed to having killed as many as 87 people.
I didn't know if I had someone who wanted to be in the record books as the worst serial killer, or if I had a genuine killer. He had no remorse for what he did. And I think that's where he comes back with his mercy killing all the time. It's like a justification or something. He absolutely has no remorse for it. He has no feeling for the patient's families.
When the judge said, do you have anything that you want to say, Donald said, I just want to tell the families that I'm sorry. Those were words, but there wasn't any expression that went with it.
I want the families of the people whose lives I took to get the compensation that's due them. I'm sorry to all the families that this happened. There's nothing I can do to, change it now. It's too late to do that.
What worse and more cruel thing could he have done? I mean, they have laid people to rest for over a decade. And then he resurrects and says, I want them to know that this homicide took place, to make them wonder what they could have done to have prevented it. They could have stayed up there a little longer in that hospital room. They should have watched him. They knew something was wrong or whatever. No, he's a very cruel person. He's a cruel person to the victims and the victims' families. There's not anything in him to like it.
Mr. Harvey said to me, or he asked me, very similarly as Ted Bundy asked me, if he's sick. And when I told him that I didn't consider him sick, his answer was, if I am not sick, then I am a monster.
Donald Harvey is an enigma, a polite, outwardly normal man who killed for kicks, again and again. What were the seeds of his aberrant behavior? We know that as a child, he was sexually violated and abused. Millions of homosexuals lead happy and stable lives, but Harvey was unable to deal properly with his homosexuality. He was suicidal and lacked even a hint of self-respect. All these factors seem to have contributed to a bizarre and alienated monster with no respect for others. A man whose inner need for power and control simply overwhelmed him and cost at least 54 innocent lives. The irony is that the system could have helped. He could have received assistance in the VA hospital after his suicide attempts, and the hospital where he worked could have been more alert. If his colleagues called him the angel of death, someone should have questioned why. If we are not careful, we may miss the signs of the next serial killer in our midst. I'm Teresa Saldana. Join me next time for another unique insight into the criminal mind on Confessions of Crime.